Right. Good afternoon. Everybody's full and wide awake right now. So we're going to talk about stop wasting time. So just to kind of get a feel of the room, how many in here are elementary schools? Okay. How many middle school, high school? Okay. The nice thing is this works regardless of the age group that you're working with. So a little bit about me. I am from Southern Huntington County School District. To try and explain where that's at, it's very remote. It's our closest Walmart's like 40 minutes. So we are in the middle of nowhere. We are small schools. We have 3 elementary schools. They have kind of adopted the same expectations simply because there's talk that our district's going to merge the 3 elementary schools into one. So when we first kicked off at our first elementary school that I was a part of, we had talked about our core expectations. We were looking at what we were going to do. We piloted at that school, and then we rolled out. It went very well. So then we rolled out to the other 2 elementaries then the following school year. And in doing that, I was able to encourage them to kind of adopt the same things just because we are a small school district, so we have to share a lot of resources, like myself. Our specialists travel among the buildings, and we didn't want them to have different core expectations in different buildings. Plus, we have students who are kind of transit in between buildings. So sometimes they end up moving to another area if they're in a rental property and then they move to another school. We wanted them to have at least one area of consistency so that they felt comfortable, and it was something that made that environment safe and predictable for them, so it wasn't a complete new environment. So we have our core expectations of respectful, responsible, ready, and safe. And we are the Rockets, so we're rocketing our students to do that. We then rolled out at the high school level, and theirs is over here on the right-hand side of your screen. They had Rocket Revolution. So we presented after they rolled out from our 3 elementary schools. We offered them, here's what our elementary program is doing. They can kind of graduate in, but they were looking at their environment. They were looking at peak areas of concern. So they went with be respectful, responsible, engaged, safe, and kind. So they wanted that engagement piece added in because we started to see an area where that kind of fell off once they moved into that middle school, high school range. Our middle school and high school is in one building, so they have that consistency among 6th through 12th grade. And they added in the kind piece because they could start seeing some bullying issues kind of taking root once they moved to middle school, high school. But regardless of where we were at and what we were doing, we always wanted to stop wasting our time. I know in-service days, that was the classic response we would get. I survived another meeting that should have been an email. And we can all identify with that. And our faculty meetings after school, things like that, it was just a time when they would just throw out information that we could have easily read through an email and had that on our own. And that was the biggest thing, is when we started implementing PBIS and we were having our monthly core team meetings, we didn't want it to be one more thing we added to somebody's plate that was meaningless, or one more thing that could have been an email. So we wanted to make sure our meetings were very consistent, very precise in why we were having the meeting. And we wanted to make sure that everybody walked away, regardless of what level we were at, elementary, high school. Everyone knew what was coming up before they went to the meeting, what was going to be discussed at the meeting. And then when we walked away, we had an action plan, and we could see that follow through. So we're going to look at those pieces when we go through it. One of the first things we did is we came up with a district calendar because I am the PBIS district coach, so I go through all the buildings. I'm also the K-8 instructional coach, so I work kindergarten through 8th grade. So I have a unique role in where I can get to all the schools, but then that means I have to then coordinate my schedule to make it work with everybody else's schedule. So we run on an A through F day cycle, so it's not like we can just say, Friday we're having a meeting at 2:30. We do that in one of our elementary buildings, but because of schedules and because of where people are at and duties and things like that, we have others that said, well, let's meet on B day, and let's meet from 12 to 12:30 when the kids are at recess, because none of the teachers on the team at that time have recess duty. Okay, but that means I have to map out the B day for the entire year so I can get this calendar, which is fine. But that way they know from the very beginning of the school year, here are our meeting dates. That was important because then we can't be like, well, I forgot. So they all get a copy of this schedule. It's our district calendar, and I just take and I edit it, and I put it in for our PBIS meeting dates, so they know all of our core meetings. I color code it because it's for my ease of reference to know which building I'm in. and which days I'm at that building. So I don't know what your situation's like, if you have a district coach or if you have an administrator that would be able to fill in that role and take this on. That was very helpful for our staff, just because then they said they knew what to expect. So it might be the first B day of each month. One of the other buildings, they are the second B day of every month, and they are at the end of the day. So when we coordinate those schedules, then we can kind of make plans we have a month in between of each of our meetings, just so when we have our action plan, we know what to expect and when it needs to be due by the next time. So that was a big piece of getting us set up and getting us started. Establishing meeting norms early in the process was something that helped too. So we had to make sure that everybody was under the same understanding and assumptions. This is how we do business. So it was very important, just because in one of our buildings we have someone, and we'll talk about that type of meeting monster in just a minute, that would be very easily take us off track. They like to talk, they like to insert new things. So what we do when we're having our meetings, since they know the dates of when the meetings are, we always put out usually 3 or 4 days ahead of time, hey, we need the agenda items, because we're building the agenda, and this is the only thing that's going to be talked about at the meeting, just so that everybody's coming in prepared and no one's getting blindsided by another topic, or the meeting gets derailed because something new is being thrown in. So when we look at the meeting norms bank, we were having trouble with this earlier, so we're gonna have to jump out of here. The meeting norms bank, if you did grab a packet when you came in, it is in there. It's just simply setting up the rules, setting up the norms of how we're going to conduct business, just because we do our core team, it's our tier 1 core team meetings, we do it within half an hour. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, is setting time limits to respect their time and also respect my time, because I usually have to jet off to somewhere else. But in doing that, we know that there's a deadline, partially because the ones that are doing it over their recess time, when the students are outside at recess, when that bell rings, the kids are coming back in, so we have to have things wrapped up by that point. So setting up the norms, it could be developed by the group. We talk about that. We set that up at the very beginning, and if you do have a change in your team, this would be something you would want to address again. Just because any new incoming team members, you would want to make sure that they're up to speed on how we're conducting business. So I know at our one elementary, we had I think it was in October, we just had one of the team members move to the high school in a different position. So we drafted somebody in, but now we're in the process of getting that person up to speed on, here's how we do business, here's what's going on when we have our core team meetings, just so that staff member's aware. It's just a respect thing for them, so that they're not coming in wondering how's this going to look and work, but they know from the very get-go, this is what we're going to do when we're in those meetings. So you can kind of set this up on your own. Like I said, talk with your team to see what works best for you. So it would be easy for me to say, here are the meeting norms, but it may not work best in your district and with your staff. So this is something, like I said, try and work it out on your own with your team and just kind of set it up. Again, it's like anything else, try and keep it to like 5 meeting norms, just because that way it's very simple, it's concise, and it's something that they don't have to stop and think like, okay, well, was that one of the 25 meeting norms, or is that one of the 5? So keep it to like 5 norms if you can. If you go over, it's not the end of the world, and the meeting norm police aren't going to break in and arrest you. But it just helps your staff and the team members be there. On our teams, we typically have, this is our core team meetings for tier 1. It's myself as the district coach. We have the building coach that is there. We have any other teachers. Our building administrator attends all these meetings as well. So is there anyone here that's an administrator within their district? Okay, so we make sure that they attend those, simply because it's also part of that end of year score that you get when they come around and evaluate your program, but also because we want them to be backing up what we're doing in the district and across the building. So that way they're aware of what's happening and they know what's going on. So if they come in and there's a situation that arises, they're already up to speed on everything, and we don't have to catch them up later. So we make sure that our building administrator attends all of those meetings. Also, any classroom teachers, we usually like to try and get a Title I teacher or a special ed teacher to be a part of that meeting as well, just because some of those kids are typically going to be one of their students that we're looking at. So they could kind of give some input into the situation with that particular student if we ever have to get down that far into looking at individual students. But typically tier 1, we're looking at the school-wide and not drilling down to an individual student. So once you set up those norms, this is where you get your meeting monsters coming in. Okay, so we've all been there. We've all been in those meetings where somebody just likes to dominate the conversation, and you could probably start picturing people and situations in your head. So number 1 meeting monster is the person that's overly talkative, someone who during the meeting makes a comment on every topic, regardless of his or her understanding of the matter. So we have one in these people in our one team, and it doesn't matter. And then what the topic is, they're always providing input in some respect, because I don't know if they like to hear their voice, if they think everyone else likes to hear their voice, but it's someone that's just always breaking in. So we set up the norm to be concise. Like, you don't have to comment on every topic unless it needs to be something that needs to be addressed specifically. So looking and identifying, like I said, your team will help guide you to what norms do you need to set up for your meetings. So the next one is the person who is highly argumentative, and I'm sure none of you have anyone in your district that is argumentative, so we can just move on. But in reality, we're going to have that person, someone in the meeting who puts up roadblocks and is consistently oppositional to any idea or thought. We actually don't have this problem currently. We've had it in the past, but by setting up the meeting norms, we've kind of eliminated that possibility of someone, it's just that negative Nancy, it's just that person that's just always down. Doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to work. So we had to look at 5 positives to 1 negative. So setting up that meeting norm, like, if we're only contributing positive thoughts, positive opinions, positive ideas on how we're going to change, because we want students to be positive, so we need to model that for them. So that was a norm that we had to set up, just because if not, that person could take, and then we know that some people follow that person easily. And then the whole environment, the whole nature of that meeting can become a very negative place to be. So setting that up from the beginning, that helped us with buy-in from other staff members, because we do want to try and pull in those people that are negative. So sometimes we intentionally put them on the team because it looked like, hey, if we got them to buy in, then some of the other ones out there that are maybe the followers of that individual would buy in as well. So that kind of helped us with our buy-in process with the whole PBIS and any type of initiatives we try and roll out from the core team, just because we're like, hey, you would be a great leader in this area. Go tell all your friends, this is what we're doing. So they kind of get their people to follow, and it's like, sometimes if you let them think it's their idea, and that's okay, we don't need the credit, let them think that, let them run with it, and then we did get buy-in that way, because we have looked historically, like I said, we rolled out with the first elementary school, we piloted it there just to see, then we rolled it out to the other 2 elementaries, and I'll be honest with you, the one elementary has been a challenge. It's been an ongoing challenge, but we have kind of turned a corner over the last year and a half. Unfortunately, it took an oil spill in that building to shut it down, and they all got shoved into the middle school, high school. That helped us kind of turn a corner. So, it's the little things you celebrate. Rambler, someone in a meeting who strays from the subject to subject. So we have a big problem with this, and that's almost anyone can kind of do this if you don't keep them concise. So really, the norm, stay on topic. Like, we have the agenda for a reason. You've had a whole month to send in new agenda items. 3 days prior to the meeting, you could add something in. So once we've established the meeting agenda, that's where it's at, and that's where it's going to be. So we're going to stay on topic, just because we want to respect everyone's time, simply because the one building, like I said, it's during their recess time, so we only have that 30 minutes. The other 2 buildings, it's at the end of the day, and do you want to be the reason someone had to stay later than their contract hours? So try and stay on topic. So those little things help out. The next one, the meeting monster, number 4, the person who is rigid. Someone in the meeting who is inflexible and unwilling to change. We tried to, when we set up our teams, to look and see, do we have some veteran teachers? Just because we value their opinions. We value they've been here, they've been around the block, they know what's going on, they know maybe the district inside and out, but then pull in some of those new teachers that are coming in with some fresh ideas. That's kind of where you can potentially have two storm fronts converge. So we looked at that very specifically. So when we were looking at the team, do we have kind of representation of the entire staff there? But then do we look at personalities would be the other piece. So letting them know that it's okay to go outside your comfort zone. It's okay to not do it the way we've always done it. Looking at those types of things, because we do have staff that will expect this is just how it's always been done. And I know in my first session this morning, we heard, the whole reason behind PBIS. If they don't know how to read, what do? We teach them to read. If they don't know how to do math, what do? We teach them how to do math. If they don't know how to behave, what do? Punish. And we still have teachers that are in that mindset. So shifting that mindset has been a big piece. So that person who is rigid is like, oh, you've always done it that way. How's that worked for you? And it's just kind of get them to reflect, so if it's not worked, it's just like when you're teaching a math lesson. If that math lesson and that skill's still been a struggle for that student, you just didn't reteach it the same way you just taught it. You kind of drop back, look at the situation, and come in from a different angle. You retaught in a different way. That's what we have to do with behavior. And so when we get to those people that are rigid, we have to tell them, you have to be willing to change. You have to be looking at new ideas, new ways of getting through to a student, because students are facing different difficulties in their life now that they didn't 20 years ago. This is my 20th year of teaching, and it has transformed a lot in 20 years. So from where I thought it was going to be and where it is now, I would have never imagined, especially the years of COVID, dare I say it. So when we were remote, for us, it was a really difficult time because we are a very rural area. Most of our students do not have internet access. Or if it was legitimately still dial-up internet. And we couldn't do Zoom meetings, we couldn't do things to reach them. So teachers had to get creative in how they were teaching. So then we used that as a catapult to say, just like the behaviors we're seeing now, we have to get creative in how we're dealing with them. So things like that, like I said, you can take those lemons in life and make lemonade out of it, because we had to learn how to do it. And the nice thing was, with the TIPS meeting, we were still able to do all of this through Zoom. With the agenda, and still have meetings so we could keep up with things while COVID was going on. So we were still able to be there for our students. The fifth meeting monster, the griper, the whiner, we all know who they can be. Don't share any names. But it's someone in the meeting who is never happy with the topics or the outcomes of the meetings. They complain with grumbling, their potential to perpetuate negativity and become contagious. We know who those people are. That's why we try and assign them specific jobs and roles. So here is your task if you choose to accept, and even if you don't, you're being assigned it. So go out and do this. But those people can be contagious in a positive way, or they can be contagious in a negative way. It's all in how you're using that person and their power, if you want it to refer to it as. But they can be very difficult to work with, just because when you leave the meeting, you don't always know what's happening when you're not physically there with them. So it's really having your ears open, your eyes open to see what's going on. The nice thing is, because we have the TIPS meeting agenda and we said this is what we're going to do and have a set deadline, there's accountability that when we come back in a month, those things better be done, or you're going to have to probably explain why it hasn't turned out the way we anticipated. So that's the one nice thing of having that agenda, because it's kind of a fidelity check for us as the staff. Are we doing what we say we're doing? And is it being successful? So there's always that self-assessment that's going on. Number 6, the meeting monster, side conversation. Someone who in the meeting is chatting on the side, making comments, asking questions, playing on their cell phone, doing everything but being attentive to what the meeting's going on. So the norm, stay focused on the speaker, write down comments or questions and speak later, be respectful to the meeting process and team members. Another way, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, to eliminate some of these things is by having everyone have an assigned role at the meeting. So if they have a specific job that they're going to be doing at the meeting, then it helps eliminate some of these things because they have to be ready and prepared to do what they're being asked to do and what their responsibility is at that meeting. Number 7, definitely wrong. Someone in the meeting who is unclear on the purpose and may speak misinformation. So we do have that situation that arises where they just kind of give wrong information, but they think they're very well informed. So that's why it's important to use data and let the data speak for itself, because the numbers aren't going to lie. And it's important that they see that, but then it's also just as important to make sure you share that out with your staff. So we make sure, like this past week, we just ended last week was the end of our first marking period. So I sent out we use Swiss in our district to record our referrals. So I sent out the first marking period Swiss reports, those 7 core reports off of Swiss. So every teacher was able to see the data. Every teacher was able to see what's going on. And I just send a quick email overview with the highlights from each of those core reports. So it doesn't lie. This is based off of the referrals that you've been giving us. So if you're willing to contest one of those, then point your finger back at yourself because you helped generate that report. So like I said, the information will speak for itself. And then number 8, the meeting monster, the person who is off the subject, someone who starts a topic discussion not related to the meeting. Again, that's the importance of having the agenda, because then we set that norm. We're going to stay on topic. We're going to move through the agenda in a quick way. Number 9, the meeting monster, the silent person, someone who is in the meeting who is virtually passive and quiet during most discussions. So we want everyone to be actively listening, but also actively participating, because it's not fair to the other team members if they're carrying all the weight and they're having all that load fall on them. So we want everybody to be participating in the meeting. And then the last one, cynicism and sarcasm. Someone in the meeting who is sarcastic and sees everything from a negative perspective. They're mocking or contempt for the process. Another thing that does help this is having your administrator present. So this kind of eliminates some things because they're now on the stage in front of their administrator. So some of these things, like I said, just how you set up your tips meeting will eliminate a lot of these, but you're still going to want to make sure you have norms set in place. And if you have any of these in your building or on your current core team, it would be helpful to go back and put these into play, just because it's going to help you with having a more productive meeting. So what is the TIPS 2? It is team-initiated problem solving. So you may hear TIPS 1, TIPS 2. It's team-initiated problem solving. It is a team effort. So it was created by Rob Horner, Ann Todd, and Steve Newton from the University of Oregon. Basically, it's a way to use data for progress monitoring, and for decision making, we need to engage in problem solving to provide access to the right type of current data, a system or process for using those data, and strategies for using the problem-solving process. So it seems like a lot, but once you get down to it, it's kind of formalizing what needs to happen. It's not enough to just have the data, so we're all probably collecting referrals, whether you how many people in here use Swiss? It's about half, maybe a little more than half. So regardless of whether you use Swiss or whether you use your own student information system to collect that data, the important thing is you use the data to help drive the problem solving. So that, again, is no good. We do CDTs right now. I'm responsible for that, and I'm missing these next 3 days. But I had a teacher yesterday say, why are we doing this? And it's being utilized at our middle school and high school. And she's like, does anybody look at the data? And I'm like, well, depends who you mean by anybody. I do. Some other teachers do. But again, if you're not using your data, what's the point in collecting it? So if you're not willing to use the data to come up with a problem solving, then why are you even doing referrals? You know, it's really a waste of that individual's time to do the referral. If you're not going to try and problem solve and come up with a way to make students successful, you're just doing a disservice to the staff that took the time to do the referral, and ultimately it's a disservice to the students. So having that data and then collecting it and then using it for a problem-solving process is the whole reason why we do what we do. So why use TIPS? It's a clear model with steps for problem-solving routine. It gives you access to the right information at the right time in the right format. So using it for a purpose. There's a formal, predictable process that a group of people can use to build and implement solutions. There's strength in numbers, which helps us with this. So it's not just me coming into the building and saying, well, we're noticing this and we're going to implement this systems change. Okay, well, that's what he thinks. When it comes from a group and it's come out of that core team meeting where we've all had some skin in the game, where we can sit down and look at it and say, here's what we're all seeing, here's what we're all thinking could be a viable process to change that behavior. Here's maybe a systems change that needs to happen, or here's maybe a certain student group that needs to be addressed, or maybe it's a school-wide thing. When that's coming from a group of staff members who have all seen that same data and they're all coming with that same thought process on that change, it's the strength in numbers. So it's not just, well, that's what his personal opinion is or that's what he wants to happen. It's the entire group. So it's not falling on just one person, and that helps with the buy-in we've seen in our district, because in the past, it may be the administrator saying, I've noticed a lot of problems in the hallway right after recess, so we're going to stagger groups coming down. Well, that's what she thinks. She flits in and out because she's got 3 buildings and, well, whatever. We're going to do what we've always done. But when we have staff that are in the building all day, every day, coming and saying, you know what, we're seeing a problem because of the referrals we're getting right after lunch in the hallway with the students, the intermediate students. How about we stagger the primary students dismissing from lunch, the intermediate students coming in from recess? Let's offset it by 5 minutes. We'll check back in a month and see what it looks like. We did, problem solved. And again, it wasn't any one person's opinion. It was driven by the data. And then we looked at the data the next month to see, hey, the systems change we made was successful. Referrals dropped significantly, and it was a group decision. And the other thing is, once the staff starts to see systems changes and the effectiveness that they have, you start getting buy-in because they're more likely to listen to what the team's saying, because they're the ones looking at the data. They've had the success record of saying, let's try this and do it. And then also the times when we try something and maybe we saw very insignificant change, or maybe it got a little worse. So then we kind of re-examine and come at it from a different angle and look deeper into the data and come up with a new idea. So they have to be able to see that you're willing to fail in your attempts and then come back and be honest about those attempts and say, it didn't really work. We're looking at the data, let's try this instead. Or get feedback from all of them to take to the meeting and say, this past month it didn't work, do you have suggestions? And then get that feedback from them. And then the last thing, it is research-based, it's evidence-based tool for supporting PBIS systems, data, and practice alignment. Now, we use this in our PBIS meetings, but the TIPS meeting agenda could be used for any meetings you're having. So MTSS academics, pulling it in, it should be used for that as well, because the process is there. So it's not just a behavioral agenda that we're looking at. This could be used for any kind of meeting you're having. Actually, faculty meetings as administrators, this could be. So when they know that they're coming to after school for a meeting, here's the agenda, here's what's going to happen, here's our beginning time and our end time, all those components, it could be used for any type of meeting that you're having, really. So the meeting foundations, you're going to want to make sure you have a clear purpose and authority. An efficient process. You're going to have a start, stop time. We have the schedule that we built at the beginning of the year when our meetings are going to be. We know that we have the norms, that we're going to be respectful in the meetings. We're going to be diligent because there are times where things come up and we have very strong opinions from different individuals. Defined roles. This is how you eliminate some of your off-task behavior, you're interrupting, things like that. You're going to want to have a facilitator at the meeting, a minute taker, a data analyst, and an active member. So, and it depends on the size of your team. Because we are small schools, our teams are small. Some of you are from larger schools, may have a larger team, core team, that's okay. The other thing is to have backups. So if the data analyst is absent today because of whatever reason, the meeting doesn't have to just suddenly not happen. It can still go on, because that's indicating and communicating to the staff that it's important enough, we're going to continue to have this meeting. So the other thing is, I know there's been a lot of staff shortages, and we are seeing staff members leaving. I know in our district and in some of our neighboring districts that have been there for 20 years, and they are suddenly able to jump ship, where in the past, if you've been somewhere after 4 or 5 years, you were kind of stuck there. Now we're seeing a lot of people moving and leaving, and jumping ship into jobs that are closer to home or better pay, whatever the reason may be, it's important to have backup positions just because you're going to have people that are absent that day or suddenly that vacancy occurs. So the meetings still need to go on. And electronic meeting minutes. So when we do our meetings, it's a Google Doc that we use. So I don't have to worry about getting copies and everyone getting their copy and whatever. It's a Google Doc, so everyone has access to it at all times, whether you're at home, vacation, or at school. You have access to your agenda. So there's no excuses in that respect. So the nice thing is, because I'm not always there, our guidance counselor is on the team at each of the buildings as well, and she shares all 3 buildings just like I do, and she has a set schedule. So when we have our meetings at the one building, she's not there. It's a day that none of them have a duty, so it works for them to meet during that 12 to 12:30 time frame, but she's in another building, actually the furthest building, so she can't just come down. So we do Zoom meetings where I share the agenda in Google Docs, I share my screen, she's able to join. We always invite our IU facilitators, so they're able to join just because, again, the IU's layout is huge, what they have to cover, so they're able to join remotely if they want to. So this way they're popping in occasionally throughout the year. They're keeping up with where we're at in our district with our meetings, and they're able to be a part of that process as well. If the principal gets pulled into somewhere else and not able to physically be in the room, they're still able to join. And the nice thing with having the Google Agenda is it's out there. They can access it wherever they are at, and their copy isn't laying in their mailbox at that school. So the screen's shared, they're seeing the agenda on the screen, they have their own access to it, and then everyone's able to meet. So that kind of eliminates that foundation piece. The problem solving is defining the problem with precision. So when you are using your data, you're looking at what, when, where, who, why, how often. You're using all those data pieces to come up with a problem, and then defining what that problem is so you can address it with precision. So building functional solutions, you want to prevent, teach, reward, consequences if necessary, and then we want to look at safety and the data use. Build the action plan for implementation, who will do what by when. So that's always a piece on there. Here's the problem, here's our solution, when is it going to be done, and by who. So that way we're keeping it very specific and it's getting out there to everybody. And it's kind of an accountability piece then as well. Because sometimes we walk away from meetings like, what were we supposed to do? When does it due by? This way it eliminates all of that so that it's out there, so then they can go back into their folder and look at the agenda to see, like, if I come in, our meeting was on Friday and I just checked out, I come back Monday, I can pull that agenda back up and see, okay, here's what I'm supposed to do. It's a new week, this is what I need to accomplish. And then we collect and use the data to measure progress toward the goal. So another piece is then the following month, when we've defined that problem and we've come up with a precision statement for problem solving, we're looking back at it. Did what we implement in our systems changes, did it work? And then we're using the data to prove whether it did or didn't, and seeing, did we meet our goal? And if not, let's either continue on for another month, or do we think it was not significant enough and we need to change up what we're doing? And then the last piece is that progress monitoring. It's just looking at, adapting solutions, like I said, to see if we need to change anything up. So with the TIPS meeting minutes form, it's created by the team facilitator or minute taker. So they build that agenda for the meeting. It's sent out to all the team members in advance of the meeting so that they're not walking in blind. They know exactly what to expect because you are under a time constraint. We want to be done and out within the amount of time we said we were going to be. It's used to guide meeting discussion, and it's used to monitor progress. Have we done what we said we're going to do? Was it effective? And then we always end with an evaluation of that day's meeting. So we get impact and input from the team members that are there. Do you feel this was a productive use of your time? And if you say no, then we're going to look at the ugly part of why didn't you feel it was productive? Was there a meeting monster that made you feel like it wasn't productive? Did something else happen, or is there something we could do better? So looking at what makes it successful, the administrator being present, that's always a huge factor. So having your administrator be on board with this, being part of it, you want to make sure you have at least 75% of your team members there. So if you do happen to walk in and it's a day where this person was out, their kid woke up and they were sick, they couldn't be there today, and this person's at a conference, and people just can't be there. It's okay to move the meeting, but the big thing is it's not like, we just won't have the meeting this month. Okay, we're gonna move it to the next B day during this time. Since we already agreed, B days were the day that it worked for everyone. So they know that that could happen at any minute. Team members come prepared to the meeting, so if they want to print their agenda, it's already been sent to them from that Google folder. They could print it, but they should know what's coming up. It starts on time and it ends on time. You have a current action plan of what's going on after you leave the meeting. You have defined roles and responsibilities for the meeting, so you know who's doing what at each meeting. The TIPS meeting minutes form is used to guide meeting discussion, and then decisions are documented on the TIPS meeting form. So a general flow of the meeting, and some of these things, there will be an agenda in here that you can look at, but kind of looking down through it is, how does a meeting flow? We call the meeting to order, we check off who's present. We keep track of attendance because one of the things we're always looking at is, do you have 75% there? And that way, if some of the staff says, well, that was just your opinion, it's like, well, no, actually everybody was there that day except for this person. This is what the team decided. We review the agenda for the day real quick. You update the progress and problem solve on previously defined student problems. Were the solutions actually implemented? Discuss the current data in relation to the goal. Did it get better? Did it get worse? Was the goal reached? And if it was, do we continue with that same goal? Do we have to change anything? And then what is the new problem that we want to address within the building? Problem solve new student problems. That new problem that we're now going to address, we're going to go back through that same process again. Identify precise problems, develop solution plans of what, who, and when. Identify goals, determine fidelity, and the outcome data needed. Like I said, we use Swiss, so we use those reports every month. We drill down and look at the data, so then we can save those reports and quickly pull them up then for the next month's meeting. We discuss organizational and housekeeping items, so it's not always just the data and the problems. Like, there are other things like, what are we doing for our quarterly reward? How are the weekly rewards going? What's coming up as far as long-term goals? Like, the end of the school year, we have a big school-wide celebration where we get all 3 schools together, and we do a big field trip at the end of the year for PBIS. So I already, in September, had that on the agenda that was being planned, and this is where we're going, because we had to put that out and communicate with the staff. This is our field trip day for PBIS for all 3 buildings, so schedule your individual class field trips around that day. So we're always looking at things like that, things that are coming up, like as far as our quarterly rewards and other housekeeping things, Principals 100 Club, those types of things we're always talking about as well. And then we wrap up the meeting with that evaluation. So we have the facilitator, the data analyst, the minute taker, the team members. So they all have a role at these meetings. So this is in your packet as well, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. It is all defined in here, but your facilitator, they're basically going to be conducting the meeting in a nutshell. That is their job. They want to make sure the meeting starts on time. They want to make sure it ends on time. And then we have they should determine the date, time, and location of the next meeting. That we don't have to do because we already have the calendar from the beginning of the year. So if that's something you need to address each meeting, if you don't have a set schedule, that would eliminate part of your meeting time. Like, we don't have to waste time doing that because it's already been defined for the year. They manage the flow of the meeting by sticking to the agenda. Then they have to prompt the other team members to jump in with the problem-solving solution. That's everybody, not just one person. And they are an active participant in the meeting. The data analyst, they are coming with the Swiss data or whatever information system you're using to collect your referrals. So they're coming with, here's what the data's saying. So it's not their personal opinion. It's not the 3rd grade teacher down the hall's personal opinion. It's not their best friend, buddy, colleague that's saying, I see a problem, we need to address it. It's the data speaking for itself. So they present it. They can share that information with the team. Then it's up to the team's responsibility then is to come up with a problem solution statement. So we're looking at, during the meeting, they lead discussion of potential new problems. So if we really mastered what we said was a problem last month, now we're looking at new data. Here's the new problem that we're seeing, and let's come up with some roles. They are also active in the meeting. The minute takers' responsibilities, they are keeping the agenda minutes of who's doing what the problem is. They're just basically taking the notes throughout the meeting. So they're recording all that on the sheet. That way it can be referred back to after the meeting. People are able to see what was discussed, what's happening. And then, like it says here, to disseminate copies. We don't do that just because it's already on Google Forms. That's another benefit, because then everybody has access to it anytime, anywhere. So some of the things you can eliminate, some of the required tasks, just by how you set up your team and how your meetings run. And then the team member's responsibility. So this is everybody that's in that team, including the administrator. Before the meeting, recommend agenda items to the facilitator. So we usually make it do like at least 48 hours, I think, before the meeting, just so we can get the agenda out, so everybody comes prepared to know what we're going to discuss. At the meeting, they are responsible for the agenda items. Everybody on the team is analyzing and interpreting the data, determining whether a new problem exists, ensure new problems are defined with precision, the who, what, when, where, and why, accompanied by a goal and a timeline. So we split it up so it doesn't just fall on the building coach. It's not just the administrator's responsibility. It's not just your district coach's responsibility. So, hey, you talk to the intermediate students, you're an intermediate teacher. How about you talk to your colleagues down in the intermediate hallway and address this with them? Oh, you're with the primary kids, you're on recess duty. How about you take care of this? We're going to implement this, and then make sure you pass it on to everybody that's at recess duty the next couple days. So we divide it out, but that's always defined who's going to do it, and then by when is it going to be done. Some things can't be an instantaneous fix, so some things we have to set up some things in process and put it out to the staff and get it rolling, but then we want to make sure that we're following up the following month to make sure this did occur and was it successful or not. And here is an agenda, so there's a copy of it in your packet. So this is what we use. It's just printed out from Google Docs we set up. It has on there today's meeting date, the time, the location, who the facilitator is, the minute taker, the data analyst. It has next month's meeting time, so when we come to that meeting, we already know when next month's meeting is, just in case you lost your copy of that calendar. Then we keep track of the team members that were present. The other thing I didn't mention earlier is we always have a parent representative attend these meetings, and that's another reason why we do Zoom. They don't attend for all the meeting, just because when we get into some of the data, it could become student-specific, and for FERPA, we don't want them to be there for that discussion. But we do have them come in. We always make sure that's at the beginning of the agenda, so that when they pop in, they're there for that beginning piece. We give them an overall state of the union, health of the building kind of thing. We let them give any feedback, and then we allow them to exit. So we do the Zoom meeting just because, the Zoom link, because of other staff members, but also because that parent, we don't want them to run into the school for like a 10-minute stint of time. It's not worth it with the price of gas. So we keep them at home. We're still able to connect with them, and then we can let them go and then still conduct our business. So we do that attendance piece as well. Today's agenda items, we list out what we're going to talk about. We always check in, like I said, with the parent first. Item number 2 always is the Swiss data. So that's a priority, that's non-negotiable. We'll check in with the parent. If they're not available, then we just jump straight to the Swiss data. And then we take care of any housekeeping things. So we were talking about our blue tickets. And then we start setting the agenda items for next meeting. We discuss that at the meeting and start building in for the following month. Systems overview, because we use Swiss, we use the Swiss Triangle data report, and we keep an ongoing record of how are things looking. So we can see this was at November last year. So we looked at what was the previous year's ending. And I'll be honest, in full disclosure, this was the difficult building I was referring to earlier. So it's 69.27, so I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. But then we were starting out the following year at 93% in October, and in November at 90%. So that lets the staff know, we are keeping tabs. It lets the students know we're keeping tabs. We're communicating this to the whole team, everybody that works in that building. And when I mean the whole team, that's everyone. Cafeteria staff, paras, custodians, secretaries, everybody's fair game in the building as far as rewards, as far as referrals. They all have a stake in how the students are behaving, because if they're in there running wild and they're trashing the bathroom, the custodian's the one stuck cleaning up the mess, literally. So we want them all to know, these are things, you can come, you're a part of this team. And actually that helped with our buy-in because we had those paras, the secretaries, the people that we often think, well, like, you're not an educator, it doesn't involve you. Yeah, it does. So getting them on board, they actually felt part of the building. We actually saw a morale boost within each of the buildings, and we saw students starting to change because everybody was kind of involved in some process. So looking at that, like I said, we go on to then the specific problem that we're addressing for the month. So the date of the initial meeting is put there. We have the precise problem statement. So it's answering those what, when, where, who, why, how often questions. We have a goal and timeline. So what are we going to do and by when? And then we come up as a team with the solution in action. Who's going to do what and by when? And then we have the fidelity outcome data. We use Swiss, so that's our data points that we use typically. And then next month when we came back, we would look at the date of the review meeting. So following month, we're going to go in and we're going to look at, was it successful? What we said we were going to do, did it work? And this is where you have to kind of get very honest with yourself. The data doesn't lie, so if it's not started, somebody dropped the ball. Typically that's not a problem because we have our agenda and we can see who was doing what and by when. So we know who's responsible for it. Was there only partial implementation? Was it implemented with fidelity or was it stopped? And then you're looking at your outcome data. So compared to the goal, did it get worse? There was no change, it improved, but there's no goal, but you're not to the goal, or was your goal met? So you're addressing those items when you have the following month's meeting. You can have more than one problem statement. Like I said, kind of gauge your building, gauge your group. If it's multiple things, you can't intervene your way out of tier one that's not running well. So then you may need to look at what's going on in your tier one system. You know, do we need to go back and regroup? Do we need to do a reteach of our core expectations before we start jumping into the nitty gritty? So typically we only have one. Sometimes we'll have an occasional second one we bring up, but sometimes we're looking for the quick wins so that we can see that it was successful. And then the very last thing is that organizational housekeeping task list. You know, the parent check-in that we do, the Swiss data review, we don't retype it down here, we just put C above. Blue tickets, what was happening, prizes, what was happening. And then the very last thing before we end the meeting is the evaluation of the team meeting. Was today's meeting a good use of your time? Did we do a good job of tracking whether we're completing the tasks we agreed on at the previous meetings? In general, have we done a good job of actually completing the tasks we agreed on at previous meetings? And in general, are the completed tasks having the desired effects on student behavior? When we do that, it's an accountability piece for the whole team, and it's an accountability piece for each individual person, because if you were assigned a responsibility and your name's on that list of, that's your name and you're gonna do it by this day and it didn't happen, you're now coming back to the next meeting and have to face all your colleagues and peers on that team. So that's the thing that's nice because it keeps it concise. It's all in one document. Everybody knows what's going to happen. The thing is, it's very cyclical. So when you're looking at what you've done, if you've accomplished it this month, you're not free and clear for next month. There's always going to be something we need to do better. When you know better, you do better. And that's what with the TIPS meeting model we're always looking at. That's why we have to use the data, just because we're looking to make students' life better. We actually had a lot of buy-in from parents doing this. We still have parents that they've set up their own process at home for PBIS. So they have their own acknowledgement reward system at home. They have their own things that they do. We've actually had area businesses kind of jumping on board and saying like, oh, I hear you're doing this and all your schools are doing this. So when I have one of your kids coming in from the district, I can do that, absolutely. Like, so they have, like, we have our rocket tickets, they have, the bus drivers are doing it on the buses, so everybody's got something in this. But like I said, it's always going back then. It's a never-ending process of always using the data and looking at it, because what may be successful and okay during the month of October, we now flip the calendar. November could be a hot mess because the holidays are coming. So we're always looking at what do we need to do and improve, just because it also puts the students on notice. Wow, I can't, like, they're really looking at everything all the time. And we use that then in our meetings. To help with that, we use this, because we use Swiss, they have a drill down worksheet that you can use. Even if you're not using Swiss, you can still use it because it's really helping you look at and define what's going on in your whole system. So we're talking about tier 1. This works for tier 2, tier 3 as well. When you're looking at these things, it's just collecting the same questions we should be asking even if we didn't do this officially. But who, what, when, where, and why. We're looking at those things. We're collecting all that information and putting it in and seeing what are we seeing as a trend in the data. So when we're having these meetings and we're doing this, this is what we're ultimately there for. We're looking at, and then the big piece is moving on to that precise problem statement. Using that data, we know what the problem is. Now what are we doing about the problem? How are we going to fix it so that students are successful? And it's been eye-opening for some of the staff to realize how much of it was a systems problem that the staff had implemented and had always done because we just always have done it that way. And changing that systems issue and dealing with that impacted students. So it's kind of a way for us to look at the ugly without really pinpointing and pointing fingers at where the root was. So defining all that and then coming up with a goal, setting goals and be realistic in your goal setting. So it's not like you're going to eliminate the problem within the next 30 days to 100% perfection. So be realistic. Are you going to look at, we want to eliminate it and have it drop by 50%? If you're cutting something like that in half, that's a big win. So then you're moving on to the next problem, and we reuse that same sheet every month. So there are videos, you'll be able to link to them. All the things are in the resources, but I don't want to run out of time for questions, if there are any questions for me before we go, because we are about out of time.
Question. Sorry if I missed it. Your precise problem statement seems to kind of be what drives the meeting when everyone's at the table. Does the data analyst come with a couple problem statements already defined, or do they come with the one and then everyone shows up?
Okay, so the question was, is it the data analyst's responsibility to come back and come to the meeting with a precise problem statement? They can, if they're comfortable doing that. They can come with recommendations, but ultimately we're looking at the team kind of developing that, just because then it eliminates what's that person's opinion. So this way, someone has to get the ball rolling, so we do ask that they come because they're the ones that have already looked at the data. Can you see, maybe based on what you've seen, is there something you could recommend? And then we go off that. So it's not like they already have it clearly defined, but they do have something to get the discussion going. This is their recommendation, what do we all think? And then kind of go from there. So I would recommend them coming with a proposal. Doesn't mean you have to go with it, but the whole team ultimately gets to have that active participation in defining what they think. So, any other questions? Yes.
How did you guys go about getting parent involvement in the
Okay, the question was, how did we go about getting our parent involvement? We looked to our PTO first and foremost. So I don't know if you have that PTO, PTA in your districts. We looked at them just because they're usually already actively involved in the school and they're well known by the staff. So it's a trusted member. So we typically would reach out to that group first to say, hey, is there someone interested in doing this? And then let them know what their job or responsibility would be. We mainly use them for like reward ideas because they're with kids. Like some of us, we've had our kids, they're grown. Like what we think's cool is so not cool today, apparently. So we get them to use to help with that. If there are things that need cut out or things like that need done or copies made, they can come in and help do that in the building. We can get feedback from them if they have it's an outside set of eyes that can say like, hey, we're noticing this problem in the building. What do you think could eliminate that? If it's something we're just like stumped and it's been like 2 months now, sometimes they have an opinion on like what would be a motivator to help with that. So we rely on them for those things. And they help with our reward days, like our quarterly reward days. Our PTO helps sponsor those, and then they bring in the manpower to help make that happen. So like we just had our fall fun day. They came in and ran stations, did fall parties, and we ended with a costume parade at the end of the day. So they kind of help man that. We're not to that yet. but I would recommend you would use it just because it formalizes the process. Like I said, this could be used for any meeting you go to. So if it's a faculty meeting, tier 1 up through tier 3, any meeting you're doing, it documents it, it formalizes it, and everybody knows what's going on, and everyone has those defined roles to know what's happening. So I would, yes. Yeah, so we have the data to use. It just formalizes it so people aren't walking in not sure what to expect. And then, like I said, this process eliminates, well, that could have been an email, because these conversations can't happen via email. So when you're looking at the data and trying to come up with a problem solution statement and coming up with a goal, and that can't be done through email. So having this set up and the systems in place gives purpose to the meeting, and people start to see the value, especially when you start seeing the success coming out of it. So they're like, well, it's important we have these meetings. It's like we've had weather that has canceled school for the day, so then they're like, oh, we missed our meeting. It's like, well, but we can still do it via Zoom. So we can jump on Zoom, still have the meeting, regardless of whether we're in person or not. That meeting still goes on because we place the value on these meetings happening, because it ultimately impacts students for the better. So we make sure we can always conduct the meetings. Yes?
Have you thought about adding a student to your tier 1 team?
That is a good question. We actually have the building that piloted. The question was, have we thought about adding a student to our tier 1 team? We are going to get ready and roll that out at our one elementary building. At the middle school, high school, we have a student team where they do that, but we've never had it at our elementary. So the building that we started with PBIS in, we actually just talked about that last month at our meeting. In January, we're going to roll out having student voice on the team, that they become kind of like the parents, because they don't need to be there for all the data pieces. But we are going to get student input and student feedback to help with student buy-in with things. So we're looking at those teams. When we do set those teams up, we've always made sure it's been very diverse and representative of the population. So it's not always, the most popular, the A+, most athletic student. It's a wide range of kids. It's the quiet kid. It's the kid that's into band or music or art, and it's the kid that is athletic. It's the kid that's high academics. It's the kid that's maybe failing their classes. Get all that feedback and input, because that way you're truly getting representation of what your team and what your building looks like. But yes, we're getting ready to start that. Our goal that we set is January. So we're going to start it in that building and then roll it out from there once we see how things go. Any other questions? So, there is my contact information. That's my email address. I don't think it's in here. It is online. The PowerPoint was online, as well as this packet in the events resources. But that is my email contact information. If you have questions, shoot me an email and I can respond back. I know sometimes you leave and you later think like, oh, I should have asked this, or you start processing and digesting things. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And I thank everyone for coming.